Well, the initial implication is relatively straightforward. If you have to pay a 50% tariff on copper imports, then the cost of your import goods go up by at least 50%.
Nobody expected this. Not construction workers, not auto manufacturers, not even the families planning a summer home upgrade. But with one bold move, the U.S. has set off a copper crisis that could ripple through every American household and push both neighbors and old allies to the breaking point. There was a time when copper was everywhere in American life, threaded through walls, cars, cables. Most people barely noticed. But for workers in construction, auto plants, or energy, copper meant jobs and lasting progress. Now, with one announcement, President Trump has shocked the market. A 50% tariff on all imported copper, sending futures to a record $5.95 per pound, up 13% in one day. A level unseen since the Great Depression. What does this mean for daily life? For families fixing the kitchen, buying a car, or installing an air conditioner, copper's hidden cost will soon appear everywhere. Experts warn construction materials may rise up to 10% before year's end. Suddenly, every home repair feels less affordable. When the metal that keeps America running gets this expensive, who really pays the price? For years, few Americans thought about where their copper comes from. Yet almost 17% of the refined copper used in the U.S. comes quietly from Canada, a reliable supply, powering factories in Michigan and homes in Texas. Now, as Canada resists the new tariff exploring legal and diplomatic options, even suggesting retaliatory taxes, this reliable flow suddenly seems uncertain. For many American workers, it's not just about copper, but about whether their jobs will last. Analysts warn that if U.S. access to Canadian copper is cut, shipments to American factories could fall by up to 15% in the next 6 months. That may mean longer waits for new cars, home wiring, supply delays, and growing worries about future paychecks. In times like these, the links between the two countries become stark, and families on both sides wonder who will feel the impact first. Few consider copper when admiring new electric cars or flipping the lights at home. Yet copper is the unsung hero behind every vehicle and mile of upgraded power line. Building an electric vehicle takes up to 80 kilograms of copper, and with prices up 5 cents a pound, each car now costs automakers $90 more, adding millions in expenses for giants like Tesla and Ford. But that's not all. Each mile of new high-voltage power line uses nearly 5 tons of copper, making grid upgrades hundreds of millions costlier. For families thinking about a new car or opening a summer utility bill, the effect is real. Electric vehicles may cost up to 5% more, and utility bills could rise $25 a month. Changes deep in the supply chain often end up felt right at home. Trade disputes can feel distant until they hit the pharmacy, phone store, or grocery checkout. Canada warns that if the U.S. keeps its copper tariff, 125 billion Canadian dollars in American goods from medicine to smartphones and groceries may face new border taxes. Already, Canadian exports to the U.S. have fallen 6.6%, with more goods going to Asia. For middle-aged Americans managing healthcare and budgets, this could mean nearly 10% higher medication costs from Canada and pricier tech and food. By year's end, up to 15,000 manufacturing jobs may be at risk when trade partners turn away. Does anyone gain, or do families on both sides just end up paying for far-off decisions?
The other problem is that the United States is starting to export less agricultural commodities, and that is a lot in part due to Mr. Trump's trade policies.
You spend months nurturing your crops, only to wake up one morning and realize your entire harvest suddenly has nowhere to go. Sounds ridiculous. But that's exactly what's happening across the American Midwest. As China unexpectedly cancels billions of dollars worth of American soybean orders, setting off a domino effect that threatens U.S. agriculture in the middle of a shifting global trade landscape. There were harvest seasons when Iowa and Illinois soybeans sailed confidently to China, sustaining farm families and small Midwest towns. But this week, everything changed. China abruptly canceled contracts for 2.4 million tons of U.S. soybeans. A $1.1 billion blow. Soybean prices plunged 8.2% overnight. Storage bins are now 13% fuller. With no buyers, I've never seen my harvest just sit here with no idea what comes next, says a 53-year-old Iowa farmer. The region faces $470 million in lost revenue impacting not just big farms, but also groceries, tuition, and savings for thousands of families. If the situation continues, average income for Midwest soybean households could drop another $1,200 to $1,800 this year, and about 4,500 seasonal jobs may vanish before the next harvest. The question lingers: who will buy the beans that have fed this land for generations? Not long ago, American soybeans were China's top choice, with Midwest shipments part of rural life. Now, after over $11 billion in Chinese-backed investment in Brazil's ports and railways, Brazil has taken over. Chinese buyers now pay $14 to $22 more per ton for reliable, long-term supply from Brazil, which provides 70% of China's soybean imports. For many American farmers, this shift isn't just about lost income, it's about being pushed aside in a changing world. This year, U.S. soybean exports to China may drop by up to 10 million tons, about 20%, forcing over 6,000 family farms to cut production or risk bankruptcy. Soybeans were once the ticket to a secure future. Now they are a question mark hanging over tomorrow. Is America still an agricultural powerhouse, or quietly becoming an outsider at the world's export table? It's not just soybeans under pressure corn. America's golden crop is feeling it too. U.S. corn exports to China have plunged 79% year on year. China also released 1 million more tons from its reserves to cut reliance on U.S. suppliers. For many Midwest farmers, once hopeful fields now bring worry. As corn prices drop and incomes shrink, tough decisions loom about next year's planning and keeping the family farm going. If this trend continues, U.S. corn prices may drop another 10 to 12% in the next 3 months, slashing profits for middle-aged farmers by $900 to $1,500 per household this year. Over 2,000 small farms might suspend operations or cut acreage by 15 to 20% next season. Some changes come quietly by the time you feel them. They're already woven into the fabric of everyday rural life. Every shipload of soybeans now carries more than a harvest. It represents America's global standing. As China and South American partners develop a new trading system, using less dollars and favoring long-term deals, the U.S. role is fading. Without quick investment in infrastructure and modernized supply chains, American farmers could lose their vital spot in the global market. If no major changes happen, U.S. soybean export value may drop another 15 to 20% next year, costing 8,000 to 1,000 jobs in soybean states. Someday we might look back and wonder, was there a time when America's strength was measured by the price of a bushel of soybeans?
We need to be ready to escalate using every tool in our toolkit. That includes surcharges or even outright restrictions on the critical minerals and electricity we supply to the United States.
Just as the U.S. heads into peak summer heat, New York's power grid is nearing overload, and monthly electric bills are quietly creeping up by tens of dollars. Meanwhile, across the border, Canada isn't raising its voice or launching direct attacks. Instead, it simply adds a quiet surcharge on exported electricity, and suddenly entire U.S. industries start to wobble like dominoes. So what's really happening behind the closed doors of those power stations? And why is this electric power standoff between Trump and Carney shaping up to shift the entire energy balance across North America? Starting March 10, 2025, Ontario imposed a 25% surcharge, around $7 per megawatt, on electricity exports to U.S. border states like Michigan, Minnesota, and New York. Though the U.S. imported about 15 terawatt-hours from Canada in 2023, worth nearly $3.2 billion, that's a big drop from 42 terawatt-hours the year before. This quiet but sharp move signals Canada is hitting where it hurts most: power prices. For families using about 800 kilowatt per month in New York, that could mean an extra $25 to $30 per month on power bills, starting as soon as Q4 2025. The surcharge doesn't just raise costs, it shakes grid reliability. NYISO and ISO New England estimate wholesale prices in New York could jump $15 to $25 per megawatt, roughly a 12 to 18% hike. In Boston, where a typical monthly power bill in summer is around $160, bills could rise to $180 or even $185. $190 in just a few weeks. Canada supplies roughly 11% of power to northeastern states. As supply tightens, U.S. utilities lean on pricier natural gas. By July 2025, gas hit $3.45 per MMBTU, up nearly 20% since January. Many U.S. substations are outdated, with 70% of the power grid over 25 years old. If power imports from Canada were lost for just 72 hours in winter, ISO New England warns up to 2.5 million households could face rolling blackouts, impacting heat, transit, and hospitals. Ontario expects to collect $150,000 to $200,000 per day from the new surcharge. That money is being reinvested in local grid upgrades and clean energy. At the same time, Canada is signing new electricity deals with the EU, Japan, South Korea, and Southeast Asia, reducing reliance on U.S. buyers. Ontario is positioning itself as a clean energy hub, offering low-cost, long-term electricity to attract data centers, battery plants, and EV factories. Their pitch? Clean, stable power for 25 years. Meanwhile, U.S. consumers could be left with rising bills. If you live in Vermont, where over 50% of power comes from Canada, you could see your winter electricity bill rise by 15 to 20%, or about $45 to $90 more per month.
Reality is plain as day, especially in places like Washington State, where we are on the front line of a trade war with our neighbors that nobody asked for.
Imagine walking into your local supermarket and finding the shelves empty of your favorite tomatoes, or the price suddenly doubling overnight. Sounds extreme. But that's exactly what could happen as Mexico, facing new U.S. tariffs, pivots billions in exports toward Canada instead. Not long ago, fresh tomatoes from Mexico were a staple in countless American kitchens, brightening up salads, sandwiches, and family dinners everywhere. But after the U.S. slapped a 17% tariff on Mexican tomatoes, something changed almost overnight. Mexico started turning its trucks and trains north, funneling nearly $2.8 billion in produce, mostly tomatoes, into Canadian supermarkets instead. Now, for American shoppers in their 40s and 50s, that reliable basket of tomatoes is a little lighter and the price tags sting. Experts say the cost of tomatoes could jump by 40 to 60 cents a pound within just a few months. It may sound small, but across the country, that's an extra $120 million. Americans might spend at the grocery store this year just for one fruit. Suddenly, keeping a favorite salsa or summer salad on the table feels a bit more like a luxury. Families are left to wonder, what will they have to give up next when the price of something so basic keeps climbing? It's a small shift with big meaning, echoing through kitchens and lunchboxes, and quietly reshaping family routines in ways no one expected. There was a time when a carton of fresh tomatoes barely made a dent in the budget. But since the return of a 17% anti-dumping tariff, part of a political back and forth that's been going on since 2019, things are looking different at checkout. For many, especially those entering retirement or juggling middle-aged expenses, the sticker shock is real. The impact goes beyond tomatoes. When trust in supply chains breaks down, it's not just the produce aisle that feels the squeeze. Everything from wine to electronics can get pricier. Analysts now warn that if the current trade climate holds, the average American household will spend about $210 more on food over just 6 months. For the local grocer down the street, that means hard choices: absorb the hit, or raise prices and hope loyal customers stick around. It's a reminder that tariffs don't just change ledgers, they change daily routines. And for many, the comfort of a well-stocked pantry. The ripple from just one policy can unsettle everyday habits, making each trip to the market a little more uncertain than before. In the background of these shifting trade winds, a bigger question is brewing. What happens when America is no longer the center of the region's dinner table? As Mexico deepens its partnership with Canada, and other countries, Colombia, Peru, Brazil, watch and rethink their own alliances. The old trade routes begin to blur. The effect can be felt in lunchboxes and kitchen drawers. Within a year, as many as 15,000 jobs could disappear from the American export sector, many of them in industries where cross-border trade once seemed a given. For middle-aged workers and their families, it means fewer chances, tighter budgets, and hard conversations about the future. It's not just about paying more for tomatoes or everyday goods. It's about a new uncertainty in what it means to buy American, and who really pays the price when the world shifts its gaze elsewhere. It's a moment that could redefine how Americans fill their shopping carts and plan for tomorrow's meals, even as the world around them keeps changing.
The United States have sent us a letter with measures that would come into effect unless there is a negotiated solution. So we will therefore also extend the suspension of our countermeasures till early August.
Something big just happened, and almost no one is prepared for the fallout. America's aggressive new tariffs have set off a trade war with the EU and Canada, triggering billion-dollar reprisals and forcing the world's supply chains into uncharted territory. Imagine you're an experienced engineer at Boeing's Seattle plant. One evening, you hear the administration is imposing 30 to 50% tariffs on goods from the EU, Mexico, and Canada. Within hours, the EU cancels a $43 billion Boeing order. Canada and the EU retaliate with $95 billion in counter tariffs and quickly shift major deals to Airbus and other suppliers. Suddenly, familiar business partners back away. Next morning, the factory feels different. Workers quietly discuss possible layoffs, pay cuts, and worry about the next bonus or summer plans. It's not just Boeing suppliers. Cafeteria owners and small machine shops near the plant also get nervous as big clients look elsewhere. If cancellations and the move to Airbus continue, 15,000 to 18,000 jobs could disappear from aerospace hubs in Washington and Texas in the first year. With average monthly earnings at $5,500 per worker, these communities could lose $80 to $100 million in income monthly. Families with someone in aerospace may see their household budgets drop by $700 to $1,200 per month, forcing tough choices about groceries, mortgage, car payments, or tuition. In boardrooms at Ryanair, switching from Boeing to China's Comac jets is no longer out of the question. For the first time, European airlines are openly considering Chinese planes instead of American-made aircraft. This threatens the decades-old leadership of the FAA and the reputation of American aviation safety worldwide. Families in America's plane towns, proud to have relatives at Boeing, now worry about job security and long-term benefits. Skilled workers are left considering career changes if European airlines truly go Chinese. Outside the plants, local diners and gas stations notice fewer regulars as business slows. Should Ryanair and others make the switch to Comac, Boeing could lose at least 5,000 to 7,000 direct and indirect jobs in the U.S. over 2 years. The lost contract value could reach $8 to $10 billion, forcing thousands of families to cut back on savings, delay home purchases, or put off college plans for their children, while U.S. firms wait. Canada and the EU quickly use CETA for zero-tariff trade, clean energy, rare earths. EV batteries all flow freely, bypassing the U.S. Many American suppliers are left out. U.S. contractors and engineers see deals shift to Canadian rivals. Projects are postponed. Salaries cut. Jobs lost. Opportunities in EVs and AI now head north. If this continues, U.S. sectors could lose 6,000 to 8,000 jobs in a year. Export contracts may drop $1,500 to $3,000 per month per company. Lost contracts could total $60 million per month across the sector. Across America, people talk about new EU trade deals with India, the Middle East, and Africa without U.S. involvement. Digital and green standards set the tone. Networks like EU-Canada and China-India are rising, with the U.S. left out. Anxiety rises for families tied to multinational firms, export jobs, or the dollar. Investments and savings now feel less secure as America's central role fades. If this shift continues, U.S. capital inflows could fall $150 to $200 billion per year. Families may see $300 to $500 per month less in investment returns and bonuses, forcing new budget decisions as America risks being left behind.
More Canadians come to America than tourists from any other country. Last year, Canadians made over 20 million visits to the U.S. and spent more than $20 billion here. But this year, many are not coming to America, as I saw firsthand on a recent trip to Vermont, right near the Canadian border.
Canadian visitors didn't say goodbye, they just quietly stopped coming. No more lines of weekend cars at the border. No more cheerful voices at the outlets and cafes. They left behind unused ski passes and a once thriving cross-border friendship that now feels a little strained. Back in 2024, over 20 million Canadian travelers crossed into the U.S., spending close to $19.8 billion. But by 2025, that number is sliding fast. In June alone, cross-border car traffic from Canada dropped 33%, marking the 6th straight month of decline. At a well-known ski resort near the Vermont border, 30 to 35% of seasonal passes from Canadian guests were never renewed. That's 1 out of every 3 visitors gone, and with them, income for local ski instructors, shuttle drivers, and small restaurants. If you've ever strolled through a small town near the border, places like Plattsburgh, NY or Darby Line, VT, you may already notice stores are quieter, cafes closing earlier, or fewer hands behind the counter. For local motel owners and diner staff who rely on guests from Toronto or Montreal, this isn't abstract, it's lost income day after day. The loss of Canadian visitors isn't just a footnote, it's playing out in real time at the register. In J-Peak, Vermont, a resort that used to see over 3,000 Canadian season pass holders now has fewer than 1,500 renewals, slashing ticket revenue by more than $1.2 million year over year. Local hotels and eateries have shortened hours or closed 2 days a week just to stay afloat. At the St. Bernard de la Colle duty-free shop, once averaging 400 transactions a day, numbers have dropped to under 200, dragging revenue from over $100,000 per day in 2024 to under $55,000 now. One store owner put it plainly, "We're sitting on double the inventory because nothing's moving." Even Vermont Bruco, a local favorite with a loyal Canadian following, saw second quarter sales drop 38%. The reason? A case of their popular IPA that used to cost 25 Canadian dollars now sells for over 36. Thanks to import taxes, about an $8 hike per case. Many customers have shifted to Canadian brands like Molson or Bose, which are cheaper and untaxed. If you're a bartender, cook, or receptionist near the border, you've probably already felt the change: fewer shifts, fewer tips, and too many empty tables where Canadian guests used to sit. With cross-border travel in retreat, towns across the northern U.S. are stepping up efforts to reconnect with their neighbors to the north. In downtown Burlington, Vermont, the popular Church Street was temporarily renamed Canada Street for the month of July. Store signs, banners, and even menus now include French translations as a warm welcome. Shops like Maple Lane Boutique and diners like North Shore Diner are offering at par pricing, meaning Canadians can pay in Canadian dollars at a one exchange rate. That can save travelers 7% to 10% on purchases enough to turn a $50 lunch from nearly 70 Canadian dollars back down to face value. There's also a new initiative called Free Canada Day, rolling out in towns from New York to Michigan, offering free admission to local attractions, lodging discounts, and special perks for Canadians visiting on July 1st, their national holiday. Some hotels even promote deals like buy 2 nights, get 1 free for Canadians, a savings of $200 to $300 per trip. These gestures are more than symbolic. For many border towns that depend on Canadian travelers, from gas stations and grocery stores to motels and roadside diners, this is a matter of survival. If Canadian guests keep staying away, the winter ahead could be a tough one.
And with President Trump, what he said, he's offended him. I can understand tariffs. I don't really understand them, what's going to happen with all this, but it's got the world kind of going crazy right now.
Milk isn't just milk anymore, it's a luxury. Just days after the U.S. imposed a 35% tariff on Canadian goods, life in border towns like Point Roberts and Darby Line has changed overnight. Simple routines, from grabbing groceries to visiting neighbors, have become fraught with new challenges as tariffs ripple through every breakfast table. Border towns like Point Roberts, WI, and Darby Line, VT, once thrived on easy routines, families and retirees crossing for groceries, especially milk. as casually as attending church. But a new 35% federal tariff on Canadian goods has erased that way of life almost overnight. Local gas stations sit empty. Diners miss Canadian regulars. And clinics are quieter as cross-border visits vanish. In Point Roberts, where 80% of business depends on Canadians, each day brings a tough question. How to survive when regulars are gone? Some shopkeepers now seriously wonder if joining Canada is their only hope. A joke turned real. Milk, once a simple staple, now stands as a symbol. Its price may soon jump $1.5 to $2 a gallon, turning a quick grocery run into a budgeting challenge. For these towns, trade policy now hits home right down to breakfast. There's a certain pride in working at Niagara Falls, New York, a place that once welcomed the world. For many middle-aged locals running restaurants or small hotels, tourism was more than a paycheck. It was a calling. Now, with Canadian flights down nearly 75%, empty dining rooms and silent hotel lobbies are common. Hotels, spas, and casinos have lost tens of millions. Some who managed front desks or kitchens now clean rooms, scraping by on less than the $1,200 average rent. For many couples, dinner talk isn't about dreams but how to pay next month's bills. As visitors vanish, so do jobs.